First big question is, the Labour Party say this is costed. There's been some dispute over that, given that part of their costings involve hoping that inflation goes down. Other parts of the costings are saying they wouldn't go ahead with certain proposed tax cuts. Now, on the one hand, the Labour Party can't say that that would be a saving, but also that the tax cuts that, for example, Liz Truss plans are themselves uncosted.
Well, they've set out three parts to it, which were extending the scope of the windfall tax, a Labour policy taken up by the government, to not proceed with some of the subsidies proposed by the Tory leadership candidates, and then to use the reduced energy bills to make a major saving on debt interest payments through having lower inflation. By contrast, you look at perhaps the unfunded commitments of Liz Truss, a Tory candidate, who said she'd scrap the national insurance provided for social care, but still proceed with the social care reforms anyway, without funding. But clearly, as your question alludes to, there's been a lot of scrutiny on Labour's plans, particularly on one element of them today around the savings on national debt interest.
Yes, certainly. And indeed, this £14 billion they say they're going to get from not going ahead with various things that the Tory leadership candidates say they will go ahead with. I'm not quite sure if that fits into current budget plans. But the idea as a whole, let's move on to the philosophy of this, because this is a universal measure, a measure that costs on a month-by-month basis more than furlough did. Is it really right to be spending tens of billions of pounds on some of the richest households in the country?
Well, I'm not certain it will cost more than furlough, but we all know when it comes to means testing, and there is a case for means testing, absolutely, in some parts of the social security system, but we know means testing is quite a slow thing to do and quite complex and costs a bit of money in itself, although it doesn't detract from its merits. I think the issue we're in now is we're about to go into September and we're in the middle of a national economic crisis without being two-party political, because that's boring for viewers. But we've had a period of drift, haven't we? Because it's not just 1 month of Boris Johnson essentially serving out his time to retirement. We've had close to a year of drift. So I think my challenge to the government and anyone criticising Labour today is, couldn't the government, the Conservatives, take an action a year ago, because we need a solution from October when the price cap is due to go up?
Yes, well, we only learnt that the price cap will be going up so much relatively recently, overtaking events. For example, these £400 payments that we're all expected to get to help through those bills, that was decided when the price cap was expected to be a lot lower. Interestingly, the Labour plan says that £400 payment would be scrapped as part of paying for this freeze. I suppose a net benefit, but perhaps a surprise. On that costing, though, furlough cost $69 billion for the entirety of COVID across 18 months. This proposal from the Labour Party is $30 billion for just 6 months. The IFS said this morning that it would likely have to run for longer than 6 months, otherwise you'd get an enormous jump in bills after that 6 month period was completed. So if we're looking at running this for a year, for 18 months, that's getting on for £100 billion. Is that really genuinely a realistic proposal?
Well, it's certainly popular, with 75% of Tory voters in favour of extending the windfall tax. But I would challenge some of the assumptions. For example, has any of this come as a surprise? Is it a surprise there's high inflation? Is it a surprise that energy prices are rising? Vladimir Putin's driving some of it, of course, with his evil act of invading Ukraine. That happened several months ago. One could argue that energy price rises have been locked in since 2014, when there was the first Russian invasion into Crimea. That's probably a bigger question for another day. But the expansionary and evil intent of Vladimir Putin, that sadly has a big impact on our domestic energy prices, the bills I pay and you pay, we have known about that for some time. And I guess, given that a lot of what Labour's proposed today seems to be relatively popular, and it looks like Liz Truss is going to win the Conservative leadership race, what is her funded alternative? The answer so far is nothing.